So I also write a lot of science fiction, fantasy type stuff, and so it's not as heavy as some of the other things that I write, though it almost always has a little bit of a dark twist. I am working right now, as some of you know, on a novel with a friend of mine, Brandon Stump. He and I are taking turns writing back and forth chapters about shapeshifters. But I didn't want to read that today because obviously it's his work and my work, it's not just mine. But this is a short piece of flash fiction. I'm going to read the whole thing. It's unpublished. It's called Stories to Barter. And it's sort of a dystopian future. It is being worked into a novel that I'm also working on about maybe the 2050s is where this would be taking place. Okay, so this is Stories to Barter. He didn't know yet, but this was James's last day working his grandmother's fields. The blade he used had lasted longer than most, past the point any homing would help. Still, the plants barely resisted his large swipes at their stalks. James knew the truth. He was becoming a man. Just as he finished his last row on the front field, Grandmother appeared on the porch, a small figure in a blue gingham dress, waving. James dropped his blade and jogged to the house. You never wanted to keep Grandmother waiting. By the time he got to the door, Grandmother sat in the middle of the living room using a rusted screwdriver to pry open the dusty black machine she used to play stories on the TV. The machine held round silver discs in them, discs Grandmother switched out when she wanted to change the stories. But they hadn't watched stories in almost a year. They'd stopped getting gas for the generator when the crops didn't make. Grandmother sucked her teeth, straining until the tray on the machine popped open. Finally, she said, more to herself than to James. Her veiny hand shaking, she placed the silver disc into one of the clear, square cases she housed the stories in. A few of the cases still had pictures in writing telling what was in them. James knew the pictures, but the writing meant nothing. She looked over a jumbled pile of the cases on the coffee table, her face scrunched up like she was thinking hard. James knew enough not to bother her while she was concentrating. After a few moments, she grabbed 7 or 8 cases from the stack and arranged them with the one she'd pulled from the machine. This'll do, she said, standing. Take these to the Barter man at the clothing retail shop. Grandmother's eyes met James. I'm going to need some credits to trade next month at the meet. James stared at the stack, hairs rising on his arms. Going to town to see a barter man didn't always go so well, especially since the corn dried up and the bees stopped flying in the fields. Last time, the barter man at the pawn shop kept talking about how James was almost ready, squeezing his arms and eyeing him up. You've never sent me to that shop before. I've never needed their credits before, and I've never needed your sass before. Am I getting to be a man, Grandmother? James asked. You are the same size you've always been. Grandmother shook her head and thrust the stack out at him. James took it and pressed it to his chest. We'll get going now, Grandmother said, knitting her eyebrows. Ain't nothing worse than watching you stand around when there's stuff to do. A crow flew off the roof of the house and the screen door slammed shut behind James. His feet moved fast over the dirt road, trying to push him quicker than any thoughts or fears he might be having. He raced into town, past the liquor store, past the dry goods store, down to the pawn shop. The clothing retail store sat next to it, a long, rain-warped shack with a rusty tin roof and just a few spots of old paint clinging on. A poorly painted sign out front that said, coverings, clothes, and casings swung in the wind, thumping rhythmically against the building. James closed his eyes and pushed against the door with his back, hoping maybe no one was there. But instead of slowly turning on its hinges, the door flew right open, pulled fast from the inside by a tall man in a red plaid shirt. The clear cases spilled from James's hands and across the store's dirty black and white tiles, the man laughing a gritty, burly laugh. James scrambled to pick them up, but a mud-covered boot clamped his right wrist down, freezing him to the floor. Blade Runner, Terminator, Iron Man. The barter man twisted his head as he read the words on the cases. What have we here? He lifted his foot off of James's wrist and picked up a thick case just beyond the boy's reach. The whole fucking Star Wars series. All 5 goddamn trilogies. Guess your grandmother really wants something good, eh? James slowly stood up, brushing his front and making sure not to look the barter man in the eye. He kept his eyes fixed on the grimy checkerboard floor, trying not to stare at the racks filled with clothes or the shelves stacked with what looked to be mannequin parts. Well, what does she want? The door creaked behind James, and he heard his grandmother say, I sent him to trade those stories for credits. James turned to face his grandmother. She stepped in front of him and sucked her teeth. And of course, throw him in too. More trouble than he's worth. Grandmother, wait, The barter man grabbed James from behind and covered his mouth with a gritty hand that stunk of oil and dirt. James felt something jab him in the back and he fell limp. He's a pretty new model, she said. Probably worth a pretty penny in parts. They're always worth more in parts, the barter man said. He dragged James through a swinging door behind the front counter. He strapped James to a table and grabbed a rotary saw from the wall. James was numb, unable to move. The barter man flipped on a saw, a loud whir filling the room. He brought the spinning blade down against James's right knee. James watched as his leg shuddered and then fell to the ground with a loud clank. But instead of blood and bones, wires stuck out from his severed limb. She didn't tell you, huh? The barter man chuckled and brought the blade down again. They never do.